Welcome to the Devil's Digest Week 10 game preview. Arizona State is back in town to take on number 10 UCLA on Saturday evening. My name's Nick Borgia. Alongside me is publisher Hode Urbino. In Hode, just last week we were talking about that uncertainty at the quarterback position, but we had a good idea it would be Trenton Bourguet, and holy moly, he went out and balled against Colorado last Saturday. 435 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and has solidified himself as the starter for the Sun Devils. So heading into this game, do you think there's a new sense of stability that the Sun Devils can have with Bourguet at the quarterback position?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. I mean, even though I think it's kind of weird to talk about stability when you talk about a quarterback who had his first ever start just last week, and granted did play extensive playing time against Washington right before the bye week of a few weeks ago. But yes, I think there's definitely a measure of stability, and I think the stability really breeds confidence. I don't think there's really any coincidence that ASU's 2 Pac-12 wins did come with Trenton Bourguet at the helm. I just think just the vibe, not only around the offense, but around the entire team is really totally different. And I also think that it really does help the defense in many ways. I mean, I think the defense, you and I talked about that after the Stanford game, was just really reaching its breaking point late in the game over there, because they got no support from the offense whatsoever. That was the only Pac-12 game that Trenton Bourguet did not play since he did see action against Washington. So I think that when you look at a game like Washington, I mean, sure, that ASU defense got punched in the face time and time again, but they knew that the ASU offense, in turn, was really going to have a response anytime Washington scored a touchdown. Obviously, it was a total 180-degree turn against Stanford, where the defense played outstanding, kept the Cardinal outside of the end zone, and the offense, time and time again, literally for 3 quarters, was not able to capitalize on that heroic performance by the defense. Then you have a game against Colorado, and sure, you can say worst Pac-12 team in many statistical categories, let alone the standings, but that offense early on just took a whole lot of pressure off of the defense because they were almost scoring at will there, especially throughout the first half. So yes, I think it's not only a measure of stability, but also a measure of confidence that helps the offense, that helps the team, and really just, like I said, creates a whole different vibe. Sometimes it's crazy what a change at a starting quarterback can do, but in Arizona State's case, it really has worked wonders.
And if we look at the offense and how they stack up against a tough UCLA defense, the Sun Devils may notice a stark contrast between that UCLA front 7 and the UCLA secondary.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, this secondary is even worse than the one that they faced against Colorado. Colorado, I believe, the secondary was yielding 219 yards on average. UCLA actually yields 235 yards. And it is kind of interesting because the front 7, like you said, is an absolute formidable unit, and then some. Through 8 games, they have 19 sacks, 40 tackles for loss. I mean, it is a front 7 that is really, really hard to penetrate, really hard to get your running game established. Even though the UCLA run defense is averaging 125 yards, I mean, it's not a great stat, but definitely not a horrible one. And as a unit, the UCLA defense is averaging 24 points. I wouldn't call them stingy, but I wouldn't call them porous either. So it's interesting that I think ASU is really probably going to employ the same tactic that they had last week against Colorado. Not worry about the opponent having a good or bad run defense, but just knowing that Trenton Bourguet, when you don't have a dual threat quarterback, but we have somebody that can just sit in the pocket and deliver, that's the approach you're going to take, regardless if your opponent's defense, the passing defense that is or is not a strength or a weakness. But I feel that with ASU's case this Saturday, this really can work in their advantage, because you look at the lone game that UCLA lost to Oregon in Eugene. No, I'm not comparing Bo Nix to Trenton Bourguet. I'm not even comparing the entire Oregon offense to that of the Sun Devils. But Bo Nix employed a very simple yet effective approach, where he just stood in the pocket with his quick release, delivering the ball to his receivers and making them do some work in space. When you have guys like Elijah Badger and Gio Sanders, the wide receiver, Jalen Conyers, a tight end, and I still wouldn't forget about Messiah Swinson, the other tight end, who I think could one of these days really be due for his own breakout game, just like Conyers was last Saturday. I think ASU taking that approach, not so much because that's a weakness of UCLA, but that's really just a clear strength for ASU. I think that's something that can really work in their advantage. Now, I think you always have the drawback that when you're not going to be able to pound the ball effectively, or maybe I take that approach to begin with, then your drives, and in ASU's case, they're probably hoping scoring drives, are going to be fairly short. And when you have an explosive UCLA offense, which we'll talk about in a minute, keeping that offense off the field as much as you can is definitely going to be paramount. So I'm curious to see what's going to happen on Saturday when ASU, I think, is actually going to pass the ball maybe a little more than they did against Colorado. If that front seven for UCLA really does slow down, if not really halt to a grind, the running game. But again, if you are going to have a quick passing game, which again I think is really going to be a necessity for Arizona State, how does that affect the time of possession, and more importantly, how does that affect the effectiveness or lack thereof of the UCLA offense? But again, I think that even though last week the ASU offense maybe kind of went against the trend, if you will, actually not trying to establish a running game against a very porous run defense for Colorado. I think this week they're going to do the same. But on the flip side over here, now you have a secondary for UCLA, which at least on paper is not as good as Colorado. And I think that the ASU passing game, at least in a vacuum, should have some success on Saturday.
And you briefly mentioned that explosive UCLA offense. Explosive may even be an understatement. I mean, this team is averaging almost 40 points a game. It's no secret they're going to put up points on the board, but the question is, what can ASU do to limit that? You know, points are going up no matter what, but can they at least limit UCLA?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, that really is mission impossible, Nick, to some extent. You have Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who has always been a talented quarterback. It seems like he's been in the Pac-12 for like 12 years now or something. But he's somebody that consistency has really eluded him. Lack of effectiveness has really eluded him. And this year, I mean, those shortcomings of the years past are just absolutely non-existent. He has only three interceptions on the year, I believe 17 touchdowns. His completion rate is over 70%. I know it's easier said than done, but you absolutely have to stack the line of scrimmage and disrupt DTR as much as you can. By default, stacking the line of scrimmage is really going to help you limit the effectiveness, at least on paper, of the running back Zach Charbonnet, who is averaging 137 yards over 7.5 yards per carry. If you can take that aggressive approach that ASU, I think, has done very well against Stanford and against Colorado, which, make no mistake about it, are nowhere close to the caliber of offense that the UCLA is. But if that aggressiveness can have some measure of effectiveness, then maybe ASU can do something to slow down the UCLA offense. Because, like I said, really having them experience a lot of difficulties, maybe asking just way too much from this ASU defense. So that's really the game plan. I think going in is a much easier said than done. Yeah, absolutely. But you look at a team like Oregon, and again, I'm not comparing both teams in terms of talent, but we look at the approach that they took. You look at the box score. I mean, they won that game 45-30. You know, I guess limiting UCLA offense to 30 points would be a success on Saturday. But you look at the box score, Nick. It's not like Oregon had 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss. They didn't have any sacks at all. I think maybe just a couple tackles for loss. So it's not so much what is or is not going to show up in the stat sheet, but just doing enough to disrupt the UCLA offense. So we can't see that Tampa 2 zone defense just sagging into coverage and just letting DTR pick you off, let alone giving running lanes to Zach Charbonnet and the UCLA rushing game. And you really can't just play 5-7 yards off of those wide receivers. Otherwise, it's going to be a long 9-10 piece. So it's definitely a tall task for this ASU defense. Maybe even tougher than Pac-12 contest that they had earlier in the year against Utah and USC. I'm really curious to see if their aggressive approach, which obviously has to have some sophistication to that in terms of disguising blitzes, can really help Arizona State. But make no mistake about it, it's going to be a whale of a task to try and slow down this UCLA offense.
And the last time that ASU took on a ranked opponent was then ranked number 21 Washington earlier in October, when Bourguet and the team took a victory over Washington, an upset victory. So do you think for their first game being back in Sun Devil Stadium since that game, is there any hope for the Sun Devils potentially pulling off another sneaky upset like they did in October?
Well, you look at UCLA on the road, and it's almost kind of weird even to bring that aspect into the discussion, because here we are the first week of November, and UCLA this weekend is going to play only the third road game of the year. So the 2 road games they had to date, playing the worst team in the league, Colorado, winning, playing arguably the best team in the league in Oregon and losing. So I think there's maybe some seed of doubt when it comes to those UCLA fans and maybe even the UCLA staff. How are we really going to fare on the road? Again, I know I'm always talking about Oregon and Arizona State, and we're not comparing both programs, but the last time UCLA was on the road, they definitely did not fare well. And I think that ASU, maybe not having the talent of Oregon, but they can take some aspects of that game plan on both sides of the ball and really run it effectively. Like I said, I think the ASU passing game really should have success against the UCLA secondary, which is not all that intimidating by any means. You just have to make sure they can really deal with that front seven. Trent Bourguet is a quarterback that really takes a sack to begin with, and you're really going to have to keep him clean. And as I mentioned, the quick release that Trent Bourguet has, not really dancing the pocket, not really trying to make plays with his feet, can definitely help prevent those tackles for loss, let alone sacks by UCLA. I'm just really more concerned about the ASU defense. And on the one hand, there's really no shame in not being able to slow down that much of UCLA offense, which, like you said, Nick, explosive might be a gross understatement to describe that unit. And when you talk about the Washington game, and I alluded to that earlier, it really was a punch for punch game. It was almost like in a really league game, whoever's going to have the ball last might have a really good chance of winning the game. And I just don't know if really this is a game where the defense can just give up points by the bushel to UCLA, but still expect the offense to be that effective and really come out victorious. So I think it's going to be a close game. But again, I'm just not sure about the ASU defense really able to slow down enough this UCLA offense, which, on the one hand, maybe probably no shame in not being able to do it because nobody was able to do it aside from Oregon. But I think that's going to be the aspect that is going to determine the game outcome. So I'm expecting UCLA to win 38-28.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hode, for all your pregame, in-game, and post-game coverage. Keep it locked in at devilsdigest.com. Also drop a follow at Devil's Digest on Twitter. 7:30 p.m. kickoff on Saturday. We will be there for Hode Urbino and the rest of Devil's Digest. My name's Nick Borgia. We thank you so much for tuning in.